afternoon, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us in this session. And secondly, I would like to apologize a bit because this talk was actually intended to be given by one of our star programmers, Yash and Rugved, but due to some mishap, he could not join us on the stage. So I'm taking up the charge, I'm leading the talk because they say the show must go on, right? So I'll try and cover everything that was supposed to be given in the talk and keep it very, very simple, right? So introducing a quick introduction about both of us. My name is Vaibhav. I'm the founder and CEO of the company and also the lead game designer on our game Mukti. With me is Rugved. He is the technical artist for Mukti. So together we work for UnderDogs. Now UnderDogs is a company I started back in 2011. Right now it's a 10 people company and we focus on making socio-impactful games on PC and consoles. On the other hand, we also work on free-to-play games for mobile and tablets. So right now what we are doing is, so in the past 7 years, we have done a lot of work. We have made more than 200 games for the clients across India. But majority of which is the client work. But we have done a lot of games for ourselves, which are on stores and on PC also. But currently we are working on one of our biggest titles, which is very ambitious for us, and that's Mukti. Mukti is a first-person story exploration game, which is based in an Indian museum and revolves around the concept of like a social issue of human trafficking. Right? So it's a very intense kind of a story, but the game is all about the intention of bringing this game out is giving the audience a great experience from India, like a three hours Sundance movie where you sit, play the game, enjoy it with different kinds of emotions, and you walk out happily, right? So that's the point of making this game. For all those who are not really aware of what Mukti is, we would like to give you a quick trailer of the game.
Raddu? Why is he so scared? Maybe I should play from the start.
So the point of showing this trailer is two things. One is we just wanted to introduce the game to you guys. Second is we wanted you to look at the kind of graphics that were there in that previous trailer. So this trailer was made a year back, and we totally admit that the graphics were not that good. What we have done in the past 8-10 months is we have worked a lot on the visuals of the game, and that is what this talk is all about. I'd like to show you quick images of the game right now that we have achieved so far. It's kind of you can see the kind of depth of field that we have achieved in the game, and this is the real-time image in the game, and it works pretty smooth. The trailer that you saw was quite jerky because of the machine. But yeah, this is the outdoor of the game. This is one of the reception area. So it's based in an Indian museum. So we have to create like this whole museum with more than 1,000 artifacts in the museum. So going ahead. This is some functionality of a camera that we have achieved because it's a museum and people would love to have their own creative freedom to click pictures and then share it so on social media. So that was one functionality. This is something. This is one of the open space in the museum. This will be filled with a lot of artifacts, and there is a lot of puzzle-based design within this area. So there are like 20 different 15 to 20 different areas within the museum where there are a lot of things and you interact with these things and solve the mystery behind the whole missing story. So yeah, I think 8 of us can do this. Everybody can do it. Jumping directly into the talk, what we are going to explain you a few important elements of lighting, which we think are usually divided into two parts. One is system or components of lighting, and the second one is visual effects, which are image effects and the post-processing effects of the for achieving better visuals. So starting with global illumination. Now global illumination is basically a system which helps, which is a combination of direct lighting and indirect lighting. So when you use this system in your Unity or in your scene, it helps you achieve a very realistic kind of a lighting effect. You can see the difference between the two images. One is a simple direct lighting and the other one is a indirect lighting. I'll explain you both in the next slide. So what happens is when a light falls on an object, this is about direct lighting, direct illumination. When the light falls on an object, it gets reflected and the user can only see the amount of area that the light is falling on, right? And what happens in direct illumination is the same light is bounced on different objects and you get a reflection of that particular color and light on other objects also. To show you a real rendered image, you can see the difference, right? There's only one light source that is falling on an object on one side. You cannot see anything else but only the area which is covered in that light, right? That is direct lighting. And indirect lighting is basically where you can see there is a lot of reflection on the wall next to the yellow wall, right? And there's a reflection of this green color of the character on the wall also. So global illumination is basically a combination of direct and indirect lighting, which gives you a real good visual effects for the lighting.
So next is linear rendering. So whenever we are using a default set rendering pipeline in Unity, it is like you are using gamma rendering pipeline. So in order to achieve great visuals, you need to change the color space to linear rendering pipeline. So basically what happens is your textures are stored in gamma space, and when you apply shading and lighting effects, and when it is displayed on the screen, it adds up with the gamma value of the screen, and therefore it creates a very harsh contrast. So in order to fix that, we change our rendering pipeline to linear pipeline. So what it does is it removes the gamma correction from the texture, then it applies the shading and lighting, and then it displays it with correct gamma value on the screen. And therefore, you can have a great appealing visual. And in the following image, you can see the difference between linear gamma space and render gamma space, as 2.2 image is has a very harsh contrast, and you can't really point the difference between shadows and dark part of the objects. Light probes. So light probes are basically a component system in Unity. What it does is it captures all the information of the lights, which is basically passing through the scene, and it stores all that information, and it will only affect dynamic objects in a baked scene. So suppose if you are using a global illumination system in your project, you should note that GI will only affect all the static objects. But if you want to show the same light sources on those dynamic objects, like suppose there is a character moving in your scene, so therefore you can use light probes to project all that lighting information on those particular objects.
So one quick addition to this is, imagine a scene where you have a room and you have a door, right? So the room is a static object because you set up the lighting and you bake the whole scene, right? So what happens is when you use GI, it will reflect all the lights and everything on the other objects which are static. So every object that you make static in the scene has that light effect, right? But when it comes to the object which is a door and that is moving, you cannot achieve that kind of effect on that particular object. So what happens is everything else looks constant, but the door will look totally different from the scene that you have, right? So what happens with light probes is if you surround that door with the light probes, it will capture the similar kind of effect from the lightings around it, and then it will project it on the door. So it makes it look uniform throughout the scene.
Here's another example. Like we have many game objects in our game where they can't be static. A player needs to hold them, rotate them, and we need to apply same lighting information on those particular objects. So in this scenario, you can use light probes. Moving on to volumetric lights.
So a lot of times you imagine a sun ray falling on your in your scene, or there's a theater scene and there's a projector projecting something on a board, right? So to achieve those kind of effects, there's a component called as volumetric lights, right? This is just an addition to a normal light, but it makes you, like, it helps you create a halo effect around the light, and then you can differentiate it with the other lights that, like, if you see this light on the top of the ceiling, right? It's a simple light which is falling on the ground. But if you need a volumetric effect, that is, there's a ray falling on the ground, and you see the dust particles moving around within that ray, you need to have this volumetric light. So this is just a concept we wanted to let you know. So this is again a rendered image from the game. This is the night scene, but the game has two different life cycle, like day and night cycle. So in the day, it will be a much more beautiful effect with those rays. But as you can see on the top right corner of the scene, there's this moonlight kind of a ray falling into the museum, right? So that is achieved using volumetric lights.
Baking. So in baking, what we do is there are multiple types of processes. So you can use real-time GI as well as baked GI. And in what happens in baked GI is basically you bake all the lighting information into light map. Light map is basically a texture which you can use during runtime, and it is very optimized, and you can store all the lighting information on it. And it basically you can use other information as well, such as ambient occlusion, baked on final gather, and it is basically a very optimized way during runtime, as real-time GI is more heavy than baked GI.
So as you can see in this image, the thing that you see on the right-hand side is called as a light map. It's a simple texture. Okay, initially it's completely blank. What happens in this scene is, I want to create a light effect in this scene, right? And I'll place all the lights that I've already done, and I'll mark all the objects on this in this scene into static, right? So they don't move, and I get these effects. So there are two ways. One is I use real-time lights, which might make your scene very heavy. And the second one is using static method and using a baking concept to increase the performance of the game, right? So in the first case, what I'll do is I'll just put lights, which are real-time lights, and I play the scene, the FPS drops. In the second scenario, I'll put the lights, I'll mark all the objects static, and I'll bake the scene. Now when I bake this scene, that image over there on the right hand side is created. So it has all the information of the light effect on it, and whenever you play it, you don't have to switch on the real-time light. You just switch that off and use that light map as the lighting effect for the game. So it drastically improves the performance of the game.
But you should note that if you are using real-time lighting or in your game, you should not use this process. It is only recommended for mobile, not for all games. It depends on your particular genre or particular project you're working on.
So those were the few important things about the components and the systems of lighting. Now we'll just jump onto some post-processing effects. So these are just the added effects on your lighting effects that makes your scene much beautiful. So the first one is ambient occlusion. Most of the times what happens is when there is a very complex scene and you try to add a lot of lights just to create those kind of dark edges and shadows within the image, in the scene, right? It hampers your performance. This is one of the best tools that Unity has introduced. It's a third-party tool. Post-processing system is a third-party tool, but then you can just import that in your scene and use these functionalities to improve your scene. So what happens is, if you see this left-hand side, ambient occlusion is totally off in this, and there is no contrast and no saturation on that image. It's a 3D scene, but when you go to the right-hand side, when you switch on the occlusion, it creates fake shadows. That's what it does. You don't have to use real-time lights to create those shadows. It just creates fake shadows. And the ambient light, what it does is it differentiates objects. It lightens some part of the objects and it darkens the other ones, which are in depth, right? So it's one of the easiest method to achieve shadow effects without using the real-time lights. This is the scene from our game, and this is the real-time scene. As you can see this shadows behind of these frames that we have on the wall, right? We have not used lighting in this at all. There's a basic lighting, which is a directional light, and on top of that, we have used our ambient occlusion to create these kind of embossed effects on the objects, which is helping us to improve the performance of the game.
Screen space reflection is basically a post-processing effect. You can use it to create puddles or shiny floors. So what it does is it is much more optimized than reflection probes because what is currently being rendered by camera is only being it is basically generating reflections. So the objects which are not present in front of the camera, they won't be generating any reflections and they won't be rendered twice. So it is a very nice effect to add realism and additional lighting effects. Here is a scene where you can check out.
This is one of the scenes from our game. Again, if you see the floors, it's completely shiny, and this is not really the work or efforts that we have put on the materials of the objects, but used the visual and image effects to create that kind of reflections.
Color grading is actually a very interesting process. So we are all familiar with filters which are being used in social media platforms like Snapchat, Instagram. So basically what we do is we take our selfies and we play with contrast, saturation, and in the end we make ourselves look 10 times better. This is exactly what we do in color grading. This technique is used in movies as well, and here you can see in the following image, here is a plain image of a actor, and when you apply color grading and you play with tone mapping and other elements of the particular post-processing effect, you can achieve a more appealing image.
So what happens in color grading is, so it's like a typical system that is provided. There's an inspector. If you guys are, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the inspector of Unity. In the inspector, you have multiple options to play with, and this is just this is the real the normal scene, and this is like worked on scene, like improving all the contrast and everything, just like image effects, right? So it's just something which beautifies your scene and to keeping the frame rates high. This is an example of all the image effects that we spoke about right now. It has everything like 4-5 effects. I'll talk about that. If you see the image on the top of it, it's a plain image. There's nothing in it. In the bottom image, one by one, there's a depth of field. So you can see the background is much more blurred and the foreground is pretty clear. So this is achieved with a component, a system called as depth of field. So you can use that. You can use that and achieve this kind of effect. On the On the left-hand side where you see these stones, right? There is no light effect in it. It's just one simple light, the directional light. But we have used ambient occlusion to achieve these shadows between these cracks. Again, on top of that, we have again used color grading to improve the visual look of it. So this is just a combination of all those 4-5 effects that we spoke about, and we just wanted to show you how you can improve a basic scene to a much beautified version of it. This is again one of the scenes from our game.
What we'll do now is we will try all these effects in Unity with a live demo.
So we just don't want to talk theory about a theory. What we want to do is just take you to one of the scenes from our game and show you how these things work. So in this process, what we'll do is we have a scene which is completely polished. It's still being polished, but we have a polished scene. And what we'll do is we'll remove all the effects and the lights, and we'll step by step show you how you can get from a basic scene to a beautified scene. So this is actually the exterior of the museum. It's a normal ground, and the game starts with this scene. So we'll just play around with this one.
So what we'll do first we'll start with lighting settings. We'll basically first play with our skybox image, skybox cube map basically. So what it does is we can just create a default skybox. And as you can see that with the default skybox, you can change the environmental lighting and overall ambient light. So we will now move back to our original skybox. This scene is actually already pre-baked. So you can see the difference between direct lighting and indirect lighting with this feature. And you can store all this data in light maps by using progressive light mapper or enlightened light mapper. And you can store all the ambient occlusion as well with this setting in light mapping settings. So in this particular setting, we are only going to use real-time lighting. We have to make sure that our light source, our sun, is basically directional light is being in same position as our skybox image. Moving on to post-processing effect. What we'll do is we will create a new camera. I will just rotate it. Now we will create a post-processing behavior. You can download it on Asset Store as well as in Unity 2018.2. You can get it from Package Manager. After that, you can create a post-processing profile. I will just name it Mukti Outdoor. And what you have to do is you have to just drag and drop this particular post-processing stack to change the overall visuals. We'll start deactivating all the elements, and you can see the change in the overall scene. First, we'll start with ambient occlusion. What it will do is it will add a fake shadow effect among the corners and the graphics of the particular objects. Here you can play with the radius. I'll set it back to 0.9. It will depend on your game and what you want to achieve. And we can play with bloom as well. The intensity is pretty too high right now. You can play with intensity, radius, and you can enable anti-flicker as well. Next thing is you can play with color grading. Right now I'm using a filmic tone mapper. There are 3 options, none, where you can create a custom template. And you can use a neutral where you can play with, you get basically more elements to play around. Right now I'm just going to switch back to filmic AC setting. And to change the scene from a gamma rendering pipeline to linear rendering pipeline, what you need to do is you need to go to project setting, player. And from the other settings, you need to change the color stripes from gamma to linear to remove the gamma correction. It is that simple. And in the end, you can play with overall quality of the shadows and lighting by going into the quality settings and just playing around with the shadow distance and shadow near plane offset, and there are many effects and which will basically create a nice effect for your project. So I'm just going to switch back to the main camera. So, and you can play with the different sources of ambient light, which is like gradient. You can customize with your own color as well, if you want to create a very non-realistic scene. But we'll just move back to Skybox.
All right. Yeah, that's it from our side. If you have any questions, also there's a QR code. You can just give your feedback on it.
The color grading thing that you said, how have you used that in your field? Like, where are the situations, or you can tell me some common situation which comes in every game where we have to use color grading?
Basically, what it does is it improves your overall look and feel of the game. Because if you are relying on default settings of Unity, and you won't be able to achieve a very great effect. And in order to add realism and a final touch-up, you can use color grading.
So there's a scene in which I'm just working on an object, and I want to emit blue light out of it, but it looks like it looks completely blue. So color grading will help me out.
Yes, it will definitely help. Yes, it will definitely help. You can play with the RGB channels of color grading, and therefore, after that, you will be able to achieve what you want to achieve. It depends completely on your project, basically what you are working on.
Cool. Thank you, guys.